So I'm honored to be the moderator of this session. These are three stalwarts amongst all the stalwarts in this conference. Yesterday, who was there in the evening? It was amazing to see the three legacy families on the same stage, right? So let's give a round of applause to Dr. Carson and the team. Anybody here from the team? The Stanford team is here? No, they are probably busy. They are running around, yeah. So we are starting now. What's your name, sir? We ready? I was told to tell the gentleman that we are starting. Yeah? Okay. Great. Welcome. You can come in the front of the room if you want. Great. So my name is Mandar Apte. I came as an immigrant to America 23 years ago. I'm a petroleum engineer. I spent 17 years working in the oil industry in Houston. And 3 years ago, I had a twist of life, and I became a documentary filmmaker. I'll share a little bit more about that. And that rabbit hole of being a documentary filmmaker takes me to the gangs of Los Angeles. So right now, I live in Los Angeles. And I would like to structure the panel such that we will give our introductions, brief introduction. Then we will go deeper into each of our work. So you will hear from three stalwarts. Then we will do something different. We will help each other. So we will help each other to role model that we are in it together. We have to help each other. So your questions, after we help each other, we show how we help each other. Your questions can be, how can you help us, or where you need help, how we can help you. And then at the end, I will ask my three panelists to just give a vision for the future. Yeah? So with that, I would like to request Mubarak ji, if you would like to kindly introduce yourself briefly.
My name is Mubarak Awad. I am the president of Nonviolence International in Washington, D.C. Also, I'm a professor at the American University in Washington, D.C. I have two hats. That's one hat of being in nonviolent world. The other hat, I'm a psychologist working with youth and children who are abused, who are neglected, who their parents, they don't want them. I find places for them, and I have been doing that for around 40 years. I'm happy to be here and happy to converse with you about how we build peace, especially in an area of conflict like Palestine and Israelis. And it's an amazing that you could see things are changing in your lifetime. Thank you.
Wonderful. My name is Margaret Russell. It's so great to see everyone here. A little bit about me. I am the daughter of an African-American Army sergeant and Japanese seamstress who met and married in Japan in the late 1940s and came to the United States in 1952 for my dad to finish his Army service. They moved to Philadelphia and raised 5 kids, of whom I am the youngest. I like to think that the theme of this panel, peace building, probably comes from the womb, perhaps, and in the sense that my father was in an army that was at war with Japan when he met my mother, and growing up in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, for us kids, it just was not a time when you had people of different races marrying each other. So on my mom's side, I'm a Nisei. On my dad's side, I have benefited very much from the fruits of his generation that really lived through Brown v. Board of Education and the supposed desegregation of the United States. So fortunately, as I said, I benefited from the fruits. I went to Princeton University in New Jersey and was one of the, I guess, first decade of women on the tail end of that. I then came out here to law school and went to Stanford Law School and have, for the last almost 3 decades, taught at Santa Clara University, which is about 25 minutes away. It's a private Jesuit university with a strong emphasis on social justice. So a little bit about me. Thank you.
My name is Stephen Zunes. I'm a professor of politics at the University of San Francisco. I grew up in a Christian pacifist family in North Carolina during the height of the civil rights struggle. My father, who's an Episcopal priest, worked with Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, and other leaders in the movement for a time in my early youth. I grew up he taught at Tougaloo College, historically black institution in Mississippi that was in the forefront of the struggle in that state. So I was active in the anti-Vietnam War movement in my adolescence. So I've seen the power of nonviolent action, and I became a student activist as an undergraduate in the 70s at Oberlin College. And this is the time, among other student leftists, there was this real romanticization about armed struggle and revolutionary violence. And people would say, well, structural violence kills 10 times more people than behavioral violence. If you're really into nonviolence, shouldn't you support armed revolution that can address the structural violence? But I didn't see it as an either-or proposition. And that's how, as a political science major, I got interested in nonviolent action from a strategic perspective. And much of my academic work subsequently, in addition to my ongoing critiques of U.S. foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East, which is my regional specialty, I have been focusing a lot on nonviolent action from a strategic studies perspective, and the very exciting developments that have happened in that field in recent decades.
So a little bit more about me. Like I said, I spent 17 years working for a small oil company, Shell. And the last 10 years that I spent at Shell, my title was Game Changer. I was the head of the innovation program that invested in ideas on the fringe that needed help to create a proof of concept. During this process, I discovered the field of peace building, and I started thinking, can peace have a profit model? Can we create a business model for peace? Just like there is a business of war, a business of drugs, can we look at making money out of promoting peace? And I was brave enough to invest Shell money in creating peace, and it led me to this rabbit hole that I'm still on. And I'm right now based in Los Angeles. I'm a meditation teacher, and I'm teaching the gangs in Los Angeles and the police officers in Los Angeles, soon to be going to Cape Town and Johannesburg. So that's a little bit of my background, but I'm a corporate innovator, and I don't like status quo. So everybody here needs to be in that misfit lens of life. And I'm sure Mubarak has more to talk about misfits, because he had a life experience. And if you could take the baton from here and just share a little deeper about your journey, what have you learned, where have you struggled, challenges you have overcome, I think it will enrich the shared learning in the room.
Thank you. First, I'm happy to be here and happy to be with you. And I am happy to hear that there is somebody thinking of peace building, making money. That's good for my ears. I thought I have to work to go and make peace building, and my work will give me some money to continue my peace building. Thank you so much. I like that. I am a Palestinian, born in Palestine, and I studied in the United States. I was very excited because I get a scholarship to work with, to go to a Mennonite school in Bluffton, Ohio, where really I start wondering what's going on within the Palestinian and Israeli, and why in the Palestinian way of struggling in nonviolence have never, ever been mentioned at all. And so that kept me going for a while. And then I went to get rich. I became a psychologist, and if you will come to me, I'll charge you a minimum of $150 every half an hour to talk to me. So and then I decided I will go back home to Jerusalem after two things. One, getting my degree, and the second, getting an American citizen. I like the American citizen than the degree, because it gave me freedom of movement, freedom to go into Israel and come out of Israel. I thought I have, being an American, life will be easy for me in Israel. And it wasn't at all. I started a counseling center there, and I find that Palestinians are not interested in counseling, they're not interested in psychology, and if you want to make money, forget it. But people will come to see me at the house, and I have coffee with them, and they tell me their problems. Then I cannot charge them if they are in my house. But we started a center to work with children, and all children who are in prison, or their parents are in prison, or prisoners who have been men and women for so long in prison, and they leave prison. And you cannot imagine, some of the problems are very, very simple problems. If you are a man, you have been 10, 15 years in prison, and you have a daughter, you left her at the house she's 16, you come out of prison and you'll tell your daughter, get me coffee. And she'll say, get it yourself. And I mean, things change. To him, there's nothing have to change when somebody goes to prison. It have to be still the same, because he's the head of the family and he is there. And the same with the wife, and the same with other children. And that becomes very much of a conflict, and you have to deal with it, and how to help children understand this idea of then it's a political, I'm not talking about criminal, I'm talking about a political people that. And after being there for several months, I find that there is no idea of how to get rid of occupation. And here I am a Rogerian. I don't know if any of you know what the Rogerian is. Roger was here in San Francisco area, and he's a psychologist. He believes that everybody have the meaning that he or she can put themselves in a position of healing themselves, whatever that problem is. And I loved it. I loved it. So I have, as thinking, being a professor or things like that, the best way is to have a meeting. So I put an ad in the meeting in the Hebrew newspaper, in the English newspaper, in the Arabic newspaper, that I'm going to get rid of occupation. And it will be for 3 sessions, and the first session will be at the YMCA in Jerusalem. And I thought I'll have 10, 12 people would come to see what it is. I have more than 300 people came, and having the idea of want to hear, and the first word out of my mouth, I say, we Palestinians, we are under occupation because we choose to be under occupation. Our choice is to be under occupation. And if we choose not to be under occupation, we have to do something about it. And here it is what we have to do. And so everybody was quiet, like you here. and they have no understanding first who I am. I don't have a big family or a tribe that will be very supportive of me. I came from United States like anyone, and they think that anybody who study in United States and come to Palestine, that he's naive. And I was naive, and I admit that. But the second day, when we have the meeting, there were tanks waiting at the YMCA, and the head of the YMCA came and told me, please, you're not allowed to speak. The Israeli would not allow us, or they close the YMCA. You have to go somewhere else. And I said, wow, I am important. I felt so important that tanks have to stop me from speaking. What kind? I didn't say anything that and you know, when you are an American, you feel you have the right to speak. And when you are in Israel, it's democracy, they have the right to say whatever you want. But the Israelis didn't see me as an American. They saw me as a Palestinian. And a Palestinian should not be that much open to say whatever on his mind. I was so much. Then the thing that I went and put a lot of people start coming instead of 30. Many people. We have 6 buses, 6 big buses to come, and we have to move the people who are coming to the conference in Jerusalem to go to Ramallah, which is north of Jerusalem, a city there, which is very nice because my wife was the principal, and we went to the school and we have the second meeting. And she said to me, you have the meeting, but tomorrow don't come because the Israeli army said you are not allowed to have political meeting in this. So the third day we couldn't go any place to meet. And I was very much have difficulty understanding who's Gandhi and what he did and why he was scared to the British. I mean, we are in Palestine. We are under the British control for a long period. It's like India. So I really took Gandhi's concept, and I decided I'll do something else. I went nearly to every Palestinian village with the camper I have, and I put pictures of Gandhi. And I went to the village and talked to the people in the village, and I understand the Arab mentality. If you go around 5, 6 o'clock and you talk to them, then a shame for them if they would not bring you in the house and give you some food and let you have a bed there rather than sleeping in the camper. And then I said, in doing that, they have to have people, other people to talk. And I'll tell them, you see this skinny fellow, he got rid of the British occupation of India, and we could do the same. So I went to each village. In some places, they accepted, other places, oh, you are a dreamer. And you think that we are under Israeli occupation. And the Israelis are not like the British. They have, the British are, as though the British are different. But the Israelis, they have more control on us. Okay, I did that. And in the office, I have to tell you that, which was scary. A fellow came and he said, the Israeli settlers, they took my land. A place called Takua. They took my land, and I said, how big is your land? He said, it's nearly an acre only, and they fence it down, and if I don't fight for it, it will go forever. So could you help me get my land back? And I said, you come to me. He said, you came to the village and you talk about this Gandhi, how he liberated India, and how he have, and I'll talk about the Salt March and everything. He said, okay, here's the situation. And it was. And I said in my mind, I told him, hey, the whole Arab world couldn't liberate your land. The whole PLO couldn't do anything for you to get the land back. He said, I could do it. He said, yes. I say, you might have more confidence in me than I have confidence in myself. And I told him, okay, you could go to your village and have the woman, the men, the children, and everybody on this day, and we have to go and take your land back. I have 3 conditions. Nobody should run away. Doesn't matter what happened. And if we are all being killed, then let it be. Nobody will throw a stone or a rock on any settler or any Israelis. And the third one, if the Israeli comes near you, it doesn't matter if he's a soldier or a settler, and if you have something in your hand with taking the fence down, you have to drop it so that you don't show that you are going to hit anybody. If you are willing to do that, we will help you. And after he left the office, I said, oh God, I hope he wouldn't come back. I never, ever, ever thought that nonviolence is so scary. It is scary. First, who am I to let people die for land? I couldn't forgive myself. Who am I to tell those people what to do? And it's becoming like, I love to have papers to give everybody to read. I have to read books. That's good. But when you get into a nonviolent action, this is very much of the core. So I decided I will also send to the news media. And I felt that at least if I'm going to die, or if anybody going to die, at least the news media will be there and they will report our death. And I say this is the time we are coming. So the police came, the military came, and for nearly 6 hours we would not leave, and they tried to shoot at us, beside us, but we didn't move. We were inside us. Something happened to us that it makes us part of that land, okay? And that's the important part. Then the military governor of Bethlehem came, and he said, what's going on? And I told him, look, this is their land, and here the papers are, and the settlers want to take that land. And we are not willing to leave. We are not willing to do anything. Do whatever you want. You are the people in power. You have the guns. You want to shoot us? Shoot us. And this is a change, and I felt the change because it's an important aspect that he himself, he was a military governor, but he was from South Africa. And somehow things clicked in him. And he told the settlers and the soldiers and the army that you go away, that land belongs to the Palestinians. First time ever. And then after that, really, we became in a different mood. And instead of lecturing, people start coming to us. If there's a land want to be taken, we go and put on it olive trees. And we start working with Israelis, and nobody call us, you are traitors working with Israelis. There were so many peace groups in Israel. We brought them in, and we start working. We start working with university, Truman Institute, and there's a fellow Israeli who's a Zionist, the worst of the Zionists even. But I work with him. His name is Eddie Kaufman. And one time I went to jail again, and I went into hunger strike, and he went outside the jail on a hunger strike. And this is another conflict. Why an Israeli fellow will go on hunger strike for a Palestinian? Why? I have to stop my hunger strike because Israelis were abusing him while he's in the street sleeping day and night there. So when we see sometimes building peace, we see sometimes conflict, but there is resolution on those. And it's an important thing to stay focused, that our interest is freedom, our interest that no human being should oppress the other person. Our interest is don't care for religion. Anybody could choose their own religion. And that becomes a peaceful thing. Thank you all.
I'm on.
Margaret.
Well, first, I just want to thank Mubarak because I've never even come close to experiencing that level of on-the-ground violence. actually. So by comparison, my remarks are going to seem very within the academy. But one of the reasons I'm here and go to other conferences is so that I can connect the work of education to the grassroots, to what's going on in the rest of the world. I just wanted to start by saying, I guess, happy birthday to Gandhi, and I wish we had a better birthday present of a world to give you, and to acknowledge Dr. Carson and others for organizing this conference. This is the first time I've ever been at an event that is focusing on Gandhi and King. So that is a very terrific, momentous event for me. And as someone who, as I explained, grew up in the United States, was legally trained in the United States, a lot of my grounding in thoughts about peace and nonviolence are grounded in the work of Dr. Martin Luther King. And it's been terrific to be able to meet people and make these connections. I was very much inspired by an essay that Dr. King wrote in 1947, sometime during his junior year in college at Morehouse College. And thanks to the King papers, I was able to bring it up very readily. It inspired me, and I decided to use it as a way of framing just this beginning contribution to the conversation, because as I said, most of my experience has actually been in being educated. I was briefly out in the lawyer world, and then and I work for some nonprofits that do legal work in the area of social justice, but I am a full-time professor, and for the last 3 years I've been the Associate Provost for Diversity and Inclusion at Santa Clara University. Let me start by reading a couple of lines from this essay from King from his junior year, 1946-47. Education should equip us with the power to think effectively and objectively. To think is one of the hardest things in the world, and to think objectively is still harder, yet this is the job of education. Education should cause us to rise above the horizon of legions of half-truths, prejudices, and propaganda. Education should enable us to weigh and consider, to discern the true from the false, the relevant from the irrelevant, and the real from the unreal. The first function of education, therefore, is to teach man to think intensively. But this is not the whole of education. If education stops here, it can be the most dangerous force in society. Some of the greatest criminals in society have been those who possessed the power of concentration and reason, but they had no morals. Perhaps the most dangerous periods in civilization have been those periods when there was no moral foundation in society. Education without morals is like a ship without a compass, merely wandering nowhere. It is not enough to have the power of concentration. We must have worthy objectives upon which to concentrate. It is not enough to know truth, but we must love truth and sacrifice for it. So this frames my remarks because my sense of the role of education as I've experienced it in the United States is pretty much completely divorced from education about nonviolence. And just as a brief experiment, no matter where in the world you're from, how many people feel that they were educated in any way about nonviolence, say, from 0 to 12 years old? Okay. From 12 to 18? Okay, and from 18 years old on? Okay, so this is better than the average group that I asked this to, so congratulations. But still, it is by far not enough. And I know that many people speaking at this conference and actually working with Jonathan Greenberg and Clarence Jones on their new institute on peace, I know that there are a lot of people who have created opportunities, but for learning nonviolence and thinking deeply about nonviolence. But it occurs to me that we have not really produced a pervasive method to infuse education across curricula, beginning when kids begin with school, to model nonviolence and to talk about it in a way that is as central to them in learning about conflict resolution as learning letters and writing and math. So how do we do that? That's one of the ideas that I want to put out there. I went to a Catholic school, was taught by nuns, who had a very strong moral influence on me, but the moral foundation was not about peace or nonviolence. It was really about, not sinning, briefly put, but also about the tenets of the religion. I teach now at a Catholic university that is a Jesuit university that these many years later actually describes its own moral foundation in terms of loving everyone, loving completely, cura personalis, the Latin for care for the whole person. And I've been tremendously influenced by that. And my work as the Associate Provost of Diversity and Inclusion includes reaching out to students who are first generation in particular, whether it's first generation college or law school, and bringing them sort of into the bounty of resources so that their views and perspectives infuse the rest of the university. And many of the experiences that those students have are very familiar, whether it's in another country or ours, of conflict and of violence, of surviving on a day-to-day level. So I mentioned the education I had growing up to age 18, and now what I do now in private religious institutions. In college and in law school at Princeton and at Stanford, I learned and learned and learned to think objectively, which, as King said, is tremendously important. But without a moral compass, without a moral foundation, without ethics, it's hard to know what to do with that precious, wonderful kind of education. I'm not saying that my professors or the university itself was devoid of caring about values. I'm not saying that at all. But there was no sustained way to connect with principles of peace and nonviolence and to have that modeled. So as a result, tremendously, I just went to my 40th college reunion a couple of months ago. As a result, I know a generation of tremendous people on a personal level and tremendously influential and educated and accomplished people, but we are pretty much a generation that has lost an opportunity, a golden opportunity to build sort of this very capacious idea of peace infused into education. So the loss of resources is something else that I want to throw out there, right? Beyond the fancy degrees and the accomplishments, well, what good is it if we're just kind of atomistic and not in our nuclear families and not really stitching a tapestry? I want to leave time for this discussion here, but the last point that I want to mention from this quote that absolutely I think applies to the crisis that we face today is having criminals in society who have no morals. And I'm not talking about people in prisons. I'm talking about policymakers and what their quote unquote leadership has done to society. And I hear him speaking as a US citizen of my own experience with this presidency, but lacking moral foundation, lacking any kind of moral compass. Not only not loving truth, but actively promoting untruth. So how do we address that with very young people? How do we address that in our institutions that are pretty much designed to be apolitical? How do we do it in a way that says, this is not a political issue, this is a moral issue. Truth-telling is a moral issue. Generational trauma is a moral issue. And so I think I threw a lot of dots out there, and we can connect them in our discussion, but thank you.
Thank you.
One of the themes of this panel is conflict resolution. And for Gandhi and King, conflict resolution was not about simply splitting the difference. They understood that no conflict could be truly resolved unless it was based on justice. You couldn't resolve the conflict between the British colonialist and the Indians by, say, well, let's give them a little more autonomy. We'll accept a little more autonomy, but not independence. Or the civil rights struggle. We'll accept some reforms and some of the more repressive laws, but we'll settle for less than total equality. Or in many of the pro-democracy movements in recent years that have engaged in nonviolent action. It's not about, again, a few reforms here, a few reforms here. It was like overthrowing the dictatorship and establishing a democratic governance. Now, this did not mean that Gandhi and King weren't willing to compromise, such as limiting demands in his particular campaign, of suspending protests for a time or making other concessions. And some of these were profoundly disappointing to many of their followers at the time. But these were tactical compromises. They were not substantive in the long run. They kept their eyes on the prize. And this combination of principled and the pragmatic, to me, I think is emblematic to Gandhi and King's power and influence. That they held forth to principle, but they were also good tacticians. They were also brilliant political strategists. And I want to talk about the strategic aspects of nonviolent action here, because we should certainly continue to educate people on Gandhi and King's legacies and their unique and critically important contributions as moral and political leaders. But let's also remember that you don't have to be a Gandhi or a King to be a leader in nonviolent resistance. A successful movement does not necessarily need a Gandhi or a King at the helm in order to succeed. Some years ago, I got to travel around the world with these young Serbs who, as students in their mid-20s, were able to accomplish nonviolently what 11 weeks of NATO bombing could not do, and that is overthrow Slobodan Milosevic, the butcher of the Balkans. Now, these guys, they were not religious, they were not pacifists, they were not what you might call politically correct. They drank, they smoked, they told dirty jokes. I mean, they were guys. But interestingly, they were engineering students. And in engineering, not all of them, but many of the leaders were engineering students. Engineers have this very practical kind of knowledge. If you see what the problem is, you see what the tools at your disposal, and how can you utilize them to maximum benefit. And they saw that nonviolent action was the way to go in bringing down Milosevic. I'm going to have to leave the conference temporarily immediately after this to go to Berkeley. I'll be back this evening, but to go to Berkeley, where I'm asked to be one of the keynoters in a conference celebrating the victory in Sudan of the pro-democracy struggle here. I mean, Sudan, one of the most incredibly violent countries in the world, and yet the people of Sudan, without a legacy of pacifism, or a noted pacifist leader, were nevertheless able to mobilize an almost exclusively nonviolent movement against what most people rank as one of the most 4 or 5 most repressive regimes in the world. I mean, this is a genocidal regime. Remember Darfur and things, and yet they are able to not only overthrow the dictator, but force the military junta that came in afterwards to step down as well. It's an amazing story. It did not get enough attention here, but it's really amazing. There was compared to now, when I was in college in the 70s, the number of dictatorships in the world has declined by more than half. And a Freedom House study noted that in nearly 3/4 of the cases, the primary reason that these countries democratized was that it was through civil society groups engaged in strategic nonviolent action. It wasn't NATO that brought down communism in Eastern Europe and freedom to the Baltic republics. It was Polish dock workers, Czech intellectuals, East German church people, Estonian folk singers. It was not the New People's Army that overthrew Marcos. It was nuns doing the rosary in front of the tanks. It was not the armed wing of the African National Congress that brought down apartheid. It was COSATU, the trade union movement, the United Democratic Front, and massive non-cooperation in the townships. I could give many other examples as well. But the underlying part is this is something that Gandhi and King knew instinctively, but we didn't have the empirical data at the time, that nonviolence, even putting aside its moral preferences, is more effective. A major study led by a Harvard researcher showed that it looked at over 300 cases in the past 100 years of movements that were going for broke. We're not talking about reforms, like civil rights struggle and segregation. We're talking about going for it all, overthrowing a dictatorship, freeing a country from colonialism, a foreign military operation, occupation, going for broke. And they found that armed struggle, there's more than 300 cases, armed struggle was successful only about 26% of the time. But that nonviolent struggle was successful 53% of the time, more than twice as effective. And in the successes, the average armed struggle took 8 years, the average nonviolent struggle only 2 years. And significantly, less than 10% of the armed struggles that overthrew dictatorships or overthrew colonial rule or whatever ended up establishing stable democracies within the next couple of years, whereas the majority, not all, but the majority of nonviolent struggles did bring stable democracies. And this is critically important. That we have been getting some serious debate in recent years between advocates of principled nonviolence, people who say that support nonviolence out of a spiritual or moral commitment, stressing the immorality of violence, versus advocates of utilitarian nonviolence, who see nonviolent action on purely as tactical or strategic terms, recognizing that it's more effective than violence. What made Gandhi and King such seminal figures, and really why we're all here today, is that they were not only able to combine the two traditions, but recognized that they were indeed inseparable. My own view, speaking as both a strategic analyst and a Quaker, is that combining the principled with utilitarian is preferable and can make nonviolent movements even more effective and powerful. At the same time, we can't wait for everybody to become a pacifist. There are battles we need to win, and win soon. And let's remember that most people in Gandhi's campaigns and King's campaigns, including many in the leadership, did not share Gandhi and King's pacifist beliefs either. Yet they are still effective, nonviolent warriors. In fact, Gandhi said of all the peoples of India, his greatest satyagrahis, his best nonviolent soldiers, were the Pushtuns, the warrior tribes of the northwest frontier, whom many of you are most familiar with as being the primary base of the Taliban. And this is why I have focused primarily on the strategic advantages of nonviolent action. And since the major reasons people aren't pacifists is their belief is that violence is sometimes necessary, the more we can convince people of the efficacy of nonviolence on a strategic level, the more people will be open to questioning the necessity of violence overall. So we need to educate people not just on the moral imperative of nonviolence, but on its power and its successes and how and why it works strategically. Because nonviolence doesn't work or not work. Violence doesn't work or not work. It is just like any other campaign, whether it be an electoral campaign or a military campaign or anything else. You have to have the appropriate strategies, tactics, know your strengths and weaknesses, your opponent's strengths and weaknesses, and plan accordingly. On average, nonviolence works a lot better than violence. but it's not automatic. You have to, we think of all these military academies we have around the world. Think of all these institutes at universities on strategic studies that focus on military things. Why don't we have those about nonviolence, especially since it's more effective than violence? This is really, and I think it's a real challenge that we really need to stress to study the strategic sides of nonviolent action as well. So I want to close, as my alarm reminded me, my time's up, with a quote from Cesar Chavez, which I'm sure that both Gandhi and King would agree with. He says, "The idea is that you have to win and be nonviolent. That's extremely important. You've got to be nonviolent, and you've got to win with nonviolence."
So, who is here from India? Some of us, okay. So, I'm from India. I grew up in India. I came here 23 years ago as a petroleum engineer. And in India, we don't learn about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We only learn that there were two international disciples of Mahatma Gandhi, Mandela and Martin Luther King. And if you answer those questions, you get your points in the history exam. We don't learn anything about civil rights movement, apartheid. We don't learn it. So when I came to the US, people ask about Gandhi. And I had not really studied Gandhiji. I had only done exams. So in my first year in this country, I was forced to read about Mahatma Gandhi. So the first book I read was the story of my experiments with truth. And that book literally changed my life. I started fasting on October 2nd. It was so powerful for me that no history exam had taught me who the man was and the kind of internal challenges that he had gone through. So I ask you one question. Would Mahatma Gandhi carry an assault rifle? Are you sure about the answer? But Gandhiji is dead, so you don't know the answer, right? But there is no doubt in the answer. I challenge you, that means there is a Gandhi inside you that knows the answer. And that is what we need to invoke. That Gandhi is not just a person, it's a philosophy, it's a thought. Ahimsa is a philosophy. And it's an internal journey. Unless we find the Gandhi within, all these words, non-violence, satyagraha, all these are just simple words. They don't mean anything. So then I ask you, what is non-violence? What does it mean? For that, you need to know what is violence. So violence happens at 3 levels. One is action. We write an email and copy 30 people on it and create that turbulence in the person who reads it. That's a violent action, isn't it? Right? So actions. One level is action. Second level is speech. Whatever we speak, if it creates turbulence, negativity in the other person, then you have also stimulated violence. But all this begins at the level of the thought. So if you are having violent thoughts, only then speech and action will come out of you that is violent. So that is why the Indian philosophy of ahimsa starts with transforming your thoughts. If you do not have the time to think bad thoughts, if bad thoughts don't come to you, then you are done. Even the oh shit will not come out of your mouth. Does that make sense? Like that is where it's a personal journey. So violence is in 3 levels: thoughts, action, speech. And when you study Dr. Martin Luther King, when I studied Dr. Martin Luther King's activism, I stumbled on this fact that at the age of 30, he had taken a 5-week trip to India. So I called some of my American friends, hey, did you know this? And not many Americans even know this, that at a very young age, this man had gone to India to go deeper into the what is non-violence and how is it brought in action? He did not go there to study non-violence. They already had used non-violence in the Montgomery bus boycott incident. They already knew Gandhiji's non-violent resistance, right? So he didn't go there to study non-violence. He just went there to deepen his understanding. And that trip has made an impact on his leadership style, activism, etc., which he speaks about. He has talked enough about it. One sentence that I remember in one of the essays is, in 1 month since he came back, the entire town of Montgomery knew the word Gandhi. Right? So that he had made that. But Gandhiji had died. When Martin Luther King Jr. went to India, Gandhiji had died. So 3 years ago, I came up with a hypothesis. As an engineer, you start with a hypothesis. The hypothesis is that it is not Gandhi the person that transformed Martin Luther King Jr.'s understanding, because they never met each other. It was the travel in India. It was the wisdom of India. It was the culture of India. It was the people of India that gave him an experience of what is non-violence. And when you break down this word non-violence, it's a Sanskrit word is ahimsa. When you break down what is ahimsa, ahimsa is love. Absence of violence, ahimsa. Absence of darkness is what? Light. So absence of violence is love. If you stretch it, it's unconditional love. Whoever you think as a pioneer of this word non-violence, right? Gandhiji, for example, their love was unconditional. They did not just care for their family, their children. The whole world was their family. That requires us to raise our consciousness. Otherwise, non-violence is just a word. Unless you feel that you are connected with the whole world, that word cannot come in action from you. So today, I challenge you, who do you consider yours? Who do you think belongs to you? And then see how your mind works. Oh, this person is not from America. It doesn't belong to me. Right? This person's skin color different from my skin color. It doesn't belong to me. This person wears a scarf. Doesn't belong to my religion. Doesn't belong to me. All these things we will have to transcend to come to that space called Gandhi. And that Gandhi space is not far away from us. It's within us. So I made a documentary film on this topic. It's called From India with Love. I took the parents from the Sandy Hook school who had gone through an incident as a parent. It bothers me. What is happening in this country? And I brought with me on this trip with the Sandy Hook parents, Black Lives activists and gang members from LA. So we had all different flavors of violence, both sides of the gun, all skin color. And we walked the journey that Dr. King had walked. The intention of the journey is, let's learn what is the philosophy of ahimsa. And that film brought me in the rabbit hole. I took delegations to India. Police officers, last delegation was police officers and community members in the same trip. 34 of us traveling in the country of India. Chaos. But you share your trauma because both sides have trauma. And that is what non-violence for me is to find the love within which every human being has. It is just hidden. It is just frozen. So with that, I share a little bit about my work now in LA. This film was screened in Los Angeles, and the police chief asked me, I can't bring all of LA to India. Can you bring India to LA? So that's where I challenged him. I said, bring me the opposite sides. So we brought Crips, Bloods, and gang members in the same room, and we went through a 2-month boot camp. I certified them as an ambassador of peace and nonviolence. Because anyone who has experienced love is not outside, it is inside you. And then you start seeing that, hey, Mubarak, just because you are in Palestine doesn't mean I cannot empathize and relate with you. Because the humanity, if I invoke my humanity, I can connect with people. Right? So that is my philosophy of ahimsa. That is my Gandhiji. And sadly, India also has forgotten this message. So my hope is that when America starts singing the song again, right? ahimsa warriors, right? Then India will also wake up. Because I firmly believe that if the whole world is a home, India is the prayer room. India has always been the prayer room for that inner transformation. And if you have never been to India, these are just words again, but those of you who have been to India, you will see it in the eyes of the villager. So with that, I invite my fellow panelists to role model how we can help each other. I will start so that it sets a trend. I'm not a scholar, but look at how, Stephen, you have gathered the data. I was researching Dr. King's trip to India. It was sponsored by the Quaker community. So for the last 3 years, I've been in search of where are the Quakers? Like, what were they doing? And I ended up in a Quaker church in the Friends Committee in Washington, D.C. So I would love to get your help to research the work that I'm doing, because you seem to be good at the measurements and the, the scholarly work that is needed to reinvigorate nonviolence. What I would like to offer my help to Margaret is, women play a very huge role. And the journey you have led, like Princeton, I would never imagine me in Princeton. I didn't have that scholarly capacity. Then Stanford Law School, you have so much scholarly wisdom inside you that let's build some educational program together that invokes the human values. Because that's what I heard you speak, is some pervasive approach of educating from K to 12 that brings the nonviolence philosophy, theory, and practice. Yeah. And with Mubarak, I would like to say, I went and screened my film in Jerusalem, and my hope is we will work together. I would love to bring a delegation of Israelis and Palestinians to find Gandhiji in India and bring Gandhi back in the Middle East. Maybe an army of Gandhis, right? And I will love to work with you.
That's lovely.
So I'll pass over to you, Mubarak, whatever you feel like sharing.
Recently, I was asked to give a course at Haifa University. And that's very simple and easy. But I am a Palestinian, and Haifa is in Israel. And for the president of the university to ask me to give lectures, a course there, he had to jump in so many things within the Israeli government, because I was deported because of my activities in nonviolence by the whole Supreme Court of Israel, as well as the Prime Minister of Israel. They said, we don't want you. You are most dangerous in our country. We want you out. And they kicked me out. And they kicked me to the United States. So I wrote him a letter. I said, why you are asking me to come when you know that the government doesn't want me, the military doesn't want me, the Mossad or security don't want me, and do you want me to get arrested again in Israel? What's that? He said, no. I took it a challenge on me that I will call all the president of the universities and to write a letter together to accept you to come to Israel. He said, good, wouldn't be open acceptance that you only come for that short period of time? And I said, yes, but there's no conditions. You cannot stop me talking what I want to talk. They say you could say whatever you want. I say, on this condition, I'll go there. I was very impressed. And if you are talking about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and you want to see a city that Palestinian and Israeli live together in harmony, it is Haifa. So in that city, hopefully that all other cities in that area could be like Haifa, then we will have no conflict between Palestinians and Israelis. I went there with, hesitation, but it was tremendous. Not only that, I spoke so bad about the Israeli government, what they did. I spoke how terrible the Israeli government, how terrible the prime minister, how terrible how they took our land, how make our life miserable. And in my students, I have Mossad, I have soldiers who took the course because they were 4 years in credit for their masters, and there was no challenge from the student. I say, what's the matter with you? Here I'm a Palestinian telling you how bad you are, and you don't tell me, hey, why we are bad? And then I said, I want 5 of you as a student of mine to check Israeli prisons and to see how many children are in Israeli prisons, and to know where and when and why and those are in prison. The course is gone and done, and those 5 students, Israeli students, are still working on a project of getting rid of the Israeli prisoners, the Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jail. After the course, it's not they are taking any credit. Yeah. And the other thing which was important for me, I said, you have to come and visit a refugee camp. They say, we are not allowed. And even the president of the university was questioning my intention, why you want to take them there? I say, I want to take them to let them hear word from the Palestinians, what happened to them. So not only I took them and sat with the Palestinian, we ate with the refugee people, and a lot of them start crying and say, we don't know that. We don't know that. I say, well, that's why I brought you here, so that at least you have the knowledge. And then they saw the wall, and they saw all these paintings on the wall and all what's happening. And then when we went back to the university, the president asked me to come and see him. And, when the president comes, you have to go. And he said, I just want to thank you. I know you will take my students to go and visit the Palestinian. I knew it, and I'm happy that they did. Thank you.
If I may follow a little bit about what you said, Mubarak. This kind of work, of course, is very, very important. It alone cannot resolve the conflict, of course. Haifa, in many ways, unfortunately, is an exception in Israel, and of course, in the occupied territories, things are many, many times worse. But I use this to segue a broader point I want to make. Obviously, the United States, for many years, has condemned terrorism by Palestinian groups, as we should. Terrorism is never justified. The U.S. has also opposed other forms of armed resistance. Strictly speaking, if you're under a foreign belligerent occupation, people have the right to take up arms against your occupier, but for many reasons, that is not the way I believe the Palestinian struggle should go forward. But not only that, the United States has also condemned wide-scale nonviolent resistance and non-cooperation among the Palestinians, like we saw during the first Intifada. Despite the iconic image of the stone-throwing youth, 80 to 90% of the actions during that period were nonviolent, as Mubarak and others at the Palestinian Center for the Study of Nonviolence had documented. And now we have, and the U.S. opposes the Palestinians going to the United Nations, getting recognition as a nation state, so they oppose the diplomatic route. And so civil society has tried to take up the slack through a campaign of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And while I personally have not endorsed the BDS call in terms of the entire package, I do think targeted boycotts, sanctions against the Israeli occupation are quite appropriate. But the majority of U.S. states have passed laws, and now the U.S. Congress is considering laws that essentially make that illegal. And they define boycotting Israel, or they define Israel as Israel or territories controlled by Israel. So even if you only are targeting companies, others that are supporting the occupation, illegal settlements, that counts as boycotting Israel, even if you don't support boycotting Israel itself. And we've had cases of a Mennonite school teacher in Kansas who was unable to give her annual pedagogical workshop for other high school science teachers because she refused to sign a pledge that says, I will not boycott Israel or territories controlled by Israel. We had a speech therapist at a school in Texas who also lost her job. We had a lawyer who was hired by the state to work with prison inmates because he refused to buy a Hewlett-Packard computer, which was on the boycott list because of HP's support for the occupation. He lost his job as well. I mean, they're essentially making boycotts illegal. And fortunately, a couple of these have been overturned by the courts. But I mean, but it kind of underscores a number of things that in cases such as the Israeli occupation, which is made possible by the U.S. support, the billions of dollars of aid, the United Nations vetoes, et cetera, but also we could expand this. Think of the majority of the world's dictatorships receive military aid from the United States. The majority of the United States is the biggest supplier to autocratic regimes in the world. And because I've gone around the world and given workshops on nonviolent action, the first thing I say is, I'm going to share some thinking about the history, the theory and dynamics of strategic nonviolent action in the hopes that you can apply this in your struggles. But my main job as an American is not to tell you to use nonviolent action for your freedom. My main job as an American to use nonviolent action to stop my government from supporting your repression. And I think that's very, very important for, whether it's involving the Israeli or Moroccan occupations, whether it involves the various dictatorial regimes that the United States supports, that we shouldn't, sit just sit and say, oh, yay, these oppressed third world people are using nonviolence. Isn't that cool? Or you should use nonviolence. You shouldn't use armed struggle. We should be saying, okay, what can I do? Being in the belly of the beast, the heart of the empire, what can I do as an ally to these using nonviolent struggle? What can I do to be their ally and to take responsibility for what our government is doing that makes their struggle all the more difficult? And so that's and again, I love the work that Mubarak's doing. All power to him. But I don't want us to ignore our responsibility as Americans, and because we have seen cases from the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement vis-a-vis apartheid South Africa, solidarity movement with East Timor. Finally cutting off aid to the Salvadoran junta and the Contras in the 1980s. I mean, and ending the Vietnam War, of course, that we have been able to use nonviolent action effectively in this country. And given the power our government has in the world, when people ask me where in the world do you think it's most important to apply nonviolent action, and the answer is right here.
Thank you.
So I have a question. I agree, and I have a question that's not at all joking, but where is it happening? I mean, where is it happening in environmental justice? Now, that is, on the theory that we need to be applying nonviolent methods now.
Are you talking in terms of here in the United States?
Yes, because that's...
Oh, I think we could just say, I saw the climate strikes.
Okay.
And walkouts. I mean, that was really impressive in terms of the sheer numbers and mobilization. In fact, I was working with Erica Chenoweth, who was doing some of the studies I was citing, the Harvard researcher, and we've been documenting that since the election of Donald Trump, there have been more protests, both in terms of number of protesters and number of demonstrators, than in any a 3-year period in American history, including the 1960s. Standing Rock, yes. That people are mobilized to a degree I've never seen before. I grew up in a college town in the 60s. I was a college student in the 70s, grad student in the 80s. I've been a professor ever since. I've seen several generations of college students. I've never seen a group of young people so woke as they are today. And public opinion polls demonstrates that, both in terms of the number of people, in terms of political awareness, but also in activism. And the thing that really excites me is the leadership I'm seeing in young women of color. I mean, they are kick-ass. They are doing amazing things. And so I really, I mean, it is really, I mean, we think of the Chinese character for crisis as a compound word of danger and opportunity, and we are definitely in a crisis period here. So, and the dangers are very real for all the obvious reasons, but the opportunities are immense. And so I have been very excited, not just on climate issues, but of course looking at gun violence that looks at U.S. Foreign policy. I mean, give me one example. I remember during the height of the U.S. war in Iraq, so many students were saying, why don't we have the big demonstrations that our generation did during Vietnam? And I said, well, actually, we had bigger demonstrations before the war even started than until at least 4 years into the Vietnam War. But the main thing was that I talked about how one thing that motivated a lot of young people to get involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement was the draft. That was a very real threat that as soon as you graduated from college or as soon as you graduated from high school, you'd be out in a rice paddy in Vietnam within 6 months or whatever. And but I say, what if, and we had over 500,000 troops in Vietnam at the height, and I said, why don't we have 500,000 troops in Iraq? I'm sure the Bush-Cheney Rumsfeld would love to do that. And says, well, we don't have a draft. Well, why don't we have a draft? And it became pretty clear that they couldn't have a draft. The resistance would be so massive. And that's why I said your generation is more woke than they were in the Vietnam period, because despite all the protests, there are enough people who are willing to go when they're drafted. Nowadays, no way. The generation they could not get the bodies. They could not even the threat of prison or fleeing to Canada or whatever. They could not get the numbers needed for an intervention of that size. And so I think I think we are. There's a lot of things to be hopeful about, to be positive about. And again, this knowledge about nonviolence is really spreading. I mean, Erica Chenoweth's book, won both top book prize in both the American Political Science Association and the International Studies Association. I don't know any book that's won both of those the same year. And it's all about the power of nonviolent action. And I remember when I was doing panels at ISA and APSA on nonviolence, we were the only panel in the entire conference. And now there are literally over a dozen panels at these annual meetings. It's become very much the mainstream. Gene Sharp, others on the front page of the New York Times. I mean, when he was still alive. I mean, the knowledge is growing. The knowledge is circulating, and people are being aroused. It's a very exciting time, and it's so wonderful that we can have a conference like this, and these centers both here at Stanford and at University of San Francisco that are looking at these issues, looking at nonviolence seriously.
So the reason I asked that, and thank you for reminding me, I can't believe I'm in the position of being more pessimistic. So thank you for cheering me up. Because a lot of what I see and think about makes me question the human spirit's desire for peace. And that is because of the influence of technology. And in the last session, one of the speakers said, don't watch television. I mean, I just think we are really corroding the human spirit in many ways, and the rise of white nationalism in this country and violence accompanying it has made me think that we're losing. So thank you for saying that.
I mean, we still might lose. I mean, I think George Lakey has a very fascinating essay where he looked at the 1930s in Europe, and where they had the same kind of polarization and growing inequality, and how in some places, of course, we had the rise of fascism, but you also had Scandinavia, where they established social democracy. And there are very, very important victories for the working class and others in a lot of places. And really it depends on how we do it. And polarized times are scary because you could go in a fascist direction, but it is also an opportunity. I mean, think of the big reforms in this country. We're in very polarizing times, the 1930s and 1960s. In the 30s, we had fascist movements here in the United States. Tens of thousands of openly fascist people marched in New York City, filled Madison Square Garden. And people the veterans of the civil rights movement are still here. I remember the incredible violence, the racist, the violence, the terror. I mean, that was very, very, very real. But think of the victories that we won in the 30s with the New Deal, and in the 60s with civil rights and the Great Society, and that kind of thing. So again, polarization can be good or bad, and I think the answer is how effectively we apply nonviolent action.
Okay.
Shall we open it up to the crowd?
Oh, yes, please. We have time.
So, in the interest of time, but we did start late. In the interest of time, see if you can limit your mind to ask questions, because you can ask questions about everything, right? See if you can stand up and say what you are going to do. If you can convert your question into a proactive action, that okay, going ahead, I'm going to work with Mubarak. Does that make sense? Questions you can ask Mubarak later, but if we can create a groundswell of action, it will inspire other people also.
We agree on a time where we say we have another 10 or 15 minutes?
10 to 15 minutes max, yeah? Yes.
Hi, I'm Atul Kothari. I'm with an organization named Eternal Gandhi Museum in Houston. And it's more of a question that the panel presented, that transforming from dictatorship to a democratic institution was a positive outcome, and I agree with that. However, the question I'd like to pose is democratic system the best way of governing that the human beings can come up with? And the reason I ask that question is, democracy is based on selfishness. I vote for the person who's going to do good for me, and that's one of the reasons we see the administration that is there today. So I'd like to challenge the panel to think about, is there a better system to govern ourselves objectively rather than based on selfishness? Number two, be the change you wish to see. We had talked a lot about various aspects and so on and so forth. And in terms of what Mandar asked, in terms of what you plan to do, my humble request to everyone is, and I'm not there yet, by the way, that become a vegan. And let's become an example of nonviolence so we can demonstrate to the world. And that is going to do a lot for the greenhouses as well. Thanks.
Hi, appreciate your words. I want to say that the current president of the United States is telegraphing his moves like he always does, and what he's telegraphing is that he would contest an election that he would lose, and that he would call it fraud, and that he's calling in paramilitary, and that he's calling for violence. And we're looking at Barack Obama potentially being the last president of the United States, with the current president being well, you never know, because Mussolini, he kept the Constitution, but, and this is probably what Trump would do, you'd keep the Constitution as it is, but you just erode all the norms, which is what he's doing. He's making it very, very clear. And so we have about 13 months to prepare, and thinking about your comment about being strategic, Professor Zunes, and thinking about the Highlander School and the civil rights movement. And one of the things they really focused on was anticipating conflict in advance, and then getting ahead of it. And so seeing this conflict in 13 months, I think what I want to do is think about what are the strategic ways that we can have a mass nonviolent action, sustained mass nonviolent action that would make the society honor and the government honor the fair electoral results that don't get tweaked with the machines, but also with contested election of voter fraud and all this stuff that he's pulling out. So I think what I would like to do is be connected to folks that are interested in a strategic approach towards shutting down ports, towards a mass civil general day of strike. We've seen the possibility with the climate strike. We've seen the possibility in 2006 with the Day Without Immigrants. We've seen this massive protests in recent years, as mentioned. And so, but I think it needs to be strategic and thought through in advance so that we can have the elbow room to create a deeper democracy. Because we see how the repressiveness of Trump makes it so you criminalize boycott, divest, sanction. The Dakota Access Pipeline, you come in with bullets. And so this approach is going to limit future protest. And so we need to create that space. And creating that space will require a kind of concerted action that happens between November and January of next year.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Fatima, and today we're here with the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center that's based in Oakland, California. And today we're here with 32 students learning, understanding the philosophy of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. And we would like to connect with organizations that have a sphere of influence and that would like to work with us and our students in developing nonviolence and teaching nonviolence, whether they be global, whether they be local, whether they be in our own nation. But we would like to connect with many different organizations, with youth, with elders, with adults. And we ask that of all of you, and we ask that of the panelists as well, as that we could connect with you in different organizations to do our work.
Let me just echo that. I'm from Oakland and went to a civil rights pilgrimage with Barbara Lee and the Martin Luther King Freedom Center. Terrific organization. So give it all your support.
Political scientists mentioned India and America are the two important examples of democracy. India is considered to be the largest democracy in the world. America is considered to be the strongest, powerful democracy in the world. But democracy practiced in these two countries is away from what democracy is. Money power, media power, as well as muscle power played an important role in electing the leaders of these two countries. India has no, India as well as in America. But Gandhi mentioned about the grassroots levels of democracy. Each village, each panchayat, each community has its own method for dealing as well as deciding things. But the democracy which we now practice elsewhere is not as mentioned by or as advocated by Gandhi regarding what democracy. The people has no say in selecting or as electing their leaders, as well as what type of article should be produced, everything which connect with the life of people. Therefore, my humble suggestion is that we should also promote the Gandhian concept of democracy throughout the world. Gandhian concept of democracy. He visualized a society where each and every human being has a say in his own affairs. Swaraj, that was a word used by Gandhi to promote democracy. Everybody has his own leader. Swaraj. Swaraj means in the first book of Gandhi, that Hindu Swaraj, he mentioned about that thing. Everybody, each and every person has his own control on himself as well as deciding things. That's all.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Greenberg, and I first of all want to say this was a fantastic panel. I want to thank all of our speakers. I teach at USF along with Professor Zunes. We've been talking about India and the United States, and I'd like to briefly talk about both countries, and I'm going to express my opinion. In my opinion, in India, if Gandhi was alive today, he would be on a hunger strike to protest the occupation of Kashmir, because he believed in religious pluralism, and he would be absolutely against the rising tide of religious ethnic nationalism that's happening, unfortunately, in many parts of India. Secondly, in the United States, I want to ask my friend, does your analysis push you over the next 9 months to be more involved or less involved in mobilizing voters? Because there's two arguments. One argument is it doesn't matter because the system is corrupt. And the other argument is it matters more than life and death. I have to work day in and day out to register voters and convince other young people to vote. Where do you come out? In the second one. Yeah.
And I think one of the ways people get excited to vote and get engaged in the political process is by seeing their own power, by getting involved by a participatory approach. And so I'm not, I don't think the first action is in November 2020. I think there are people like what's happening with the young people getting involved in the climate strike. Now they're involved in politics. And they're involved in politics and they're going to register to vote. And once it's a process. And so the voting is a piece of it. And so I think getting involved in politics in these day-to-day ways, and then that definitely includes being active on November.
The
Thank
lady
you.
at the back.
Can I just briefly complete that?
Can you do that one-on-one?
No, but I'll pass it on.
Thank you. No, this one, the one in the green was raising her hand for quite a while. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Ann Overton, and one of the ancient texts is the Dhammapada from Buddhism, and they teach what we think leads to what we do. They use the analogy of an ox cart. You have the ox walking, and the cart follows it. The ox is your thought, and the cart is your experience. I have felt very lucky in our country that there's not more. Our country is very bitterly divided. I'm surprised there's not more violence between the two sides, And one thing I've tried to encourage people, just online, is I think I'm an ardent supporter of freedom of speech, but I gave the example of online, there were pictures of the First Lady when she was 25. There are pictures of her posing naked, photographer. And then there's another one of somebody with a young man with a wheelbarrow and an enormous pile of dirt, and he's getting rid of the excrement from what Obama has done. And I said, these things are just going to make the divide more bitter. It's not going to help us moving forward. So I've tried to advocate just saying what you think, tell the opposition what they're doing, but don't add insults. Don't automatically use adjectives towards the other side that are useless, because I think it will only raise the temperature and make violence more likely. Thank you.
So I've been told to just call it because we are running late.
For 1 minute, okay? Because my friend from the Greenberg is brought in Kashmir into the debate.
No, but I would like to defer it now because we are really running late. Your comment, if you can handle it one-on-one, that will be amazing.
Given a chance to him, but I'm a deputy consul general of India.
Yeah, but
please.
Sir, one second. You can express your disagreement. He's expressing his point of view. Yeah. So, thank you very much as a moderator for respecting the space and creating the space. There is no right or wrong. And like I said, challenge yourself from today. Who belongs to you? And that starts with the thought. And watch yourself. It's a personal journey. It's not pointing a finger at others. So I wish you a very beautiful day. And all of us will be waiting here. If you have any questions, step outside. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
What's happening?